Welcome to the Spurs News Podcast, your home for all things Tottenham Hotspur. Now, here are your hosts.
Hello everybody and welcome to a Spurs News Podcast special where we, this week, are talking to the author of a Spurs book, who is something that's coming out very soon. We are talking to a gentleman called Stephan Peace. Hello, say hello to everybody.
Hello, Sam. How are you? Hello to everyone. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah, I'm not too bad, thanks. I'm a typical Brit when it comes to this. I have to talk about the weather. It's summertime, but the last few years have been roasting, like 30s to even 40 last year. This year it's not that yet, and I'm actually kind of enjoying it. I'm one of those people.
I'll tell you what, again, it's classic of us to be very British and talk about the weather.
Yeah.
Here in the news today, I think if anyone's holidaying in Southern Europe at the moment, they're kind of hitting mid-40s. So
Yeah.
I think you're happy where you are, Sam.
Very, very, very happy. But yeah, so just a very brief introduction. Obviously, the Spurs News Podcast is going to continue doing its weekly thing. We're going to be talking about games as and when and all the events that happens in our roller coaster madness of a club throughout the season. But on top of that, we're also going to be putting together one show a month, which is going to be sort of like our special things. Now, with this in mind, we're kicking this series off with Stephan, where we're going to be chatting about his book and the launch of that. But in the future, we're also going to do things where we just kind of focus in on one subject and go at it. Either me and Matt, me and Stephan, what we're going to do is we're going to pick topics, Spurs related, pick a side, maybe toss a coin on who has which side of the debate, and then we're just going to research it, and then once a month put together a show where we're absolutely tearing each other apart on it, which should be a lot of fun. The list of subjects we got so far includes, one of them is titled, Was Sol Campbell Right? Now that's going to be an hilarious show for everybody, I'm sure of it. But anyway, that's what's to come in the future. Today, like I said, I'm talking to Stephan. We're going to go over the book, and first of all, and I think this is the title of the book is Fantastic Disappointment, The Story of Spurs 1986-87. Fantastic Disappointment. Where, go on, explain the title. Where did that all come from?
Do you know what? Coming up with a title was never easy. I probably got it down to about several options. And I was having a conversation with my publisher one day, and we were trying to sort of slim it down because I wasn't really happy with what we were sort of choosing. Yeah. And then she just said to me, "Do you know what did this season make you think of?" Mm. And then I tried to just slim it down. I said, "Do you know what? It was absolutely fantastic. You know, for the football they played, it was absolutely fantastic. But at the end, to end the season with nothing, it was so disappointing."
Yeah.
And then that was kind of it, how we kind of mashed that together. Fantastic disappointment. Keep it simple, but keep it very kind of on trend as well, still with Spurs nowadays. So, it's a historic. Yeah. So I think life as a Spurs fan, I think whatever generation you grew up in, it's all relative. It's all near enough the same. But hey ho, that's why we support them, isn't it?
So speaking of sort of life as a Spurs fan, whenever we have anybody on, it's always a question I ask. With yourself, when did you start following Spurs? Was it a family thing? Was it you were brought into it? I mean, if you're willing to share your age, I know some people won't. I'm 40, so if that makes you feel better.
Sadly, it doesn't make me feel better. No. I'm 48 at the moment, okay. But no, do you know, it is a family thing, and elements of this book, to be honest, was a bit of an ode to my dad, because when I started going to Spurs as a kid, this particular season I've chosen was my first season as a season ticket holder at Spurs.
Oh wow, okay.
It holds really good memories for me for so many reasons, which I've kind of outlined in the book. But it was my dad. My dad was an avid goer of Spurs during the double winning seasons in like the late 50s and early 60s, and that started him. So me and my brother, by default, we then had to sort of support Spurs.
Absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, kind of late 70s, early 80s. That's when I started going. But yeah, it's probably for the mid 80s onwards. That's when I started going a lot more regularly. So yeah, that's my origins.
Yeah, yeah, and so like you said, so the 86-87 season, which is the subject for the book, that was like you said, it was your first season as a season ticket holder.
That's right. Yeah.
So yeah, so is that why you've picked this season out? Because it's sort of a special thing for you, or do you think this season is one that deserves sort of highlighting, regardless of that?
Yeah. To be honest, Sam, it's probably a bit of both, really. Number one, it was my first year of watching football
Yeah,
so much, and bear in mind back then, football on telly was very few and far between.
yeah,
Again, I kind of highlight some of that in the book, because TV and football nowadays is a completely different beast to what it
yeah,
was in the mid late 80s.
yeah. True, and
So
with the
going there,
internet as well.
yeah, exactly. So going there week in, week out, seeing some of my heroes and seeing some, again, truly world class footballers during that period was an absolute pleasure.
Well,
Sorry, go on.
speaking, sorry, yeah, speaking of the world class footballers, a lot of the people listening. I mean, I was born in 83, so 86-87 for me isn't really in my memory. I know my older brother, he was born in 75, and it's very much that was very much his team, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
It's very much,
yeah,
he describes Glenn Hoddle as God in socks and won't hear anything other than that. That's
yeah.
just, so who were the players that so from 86-87, just to kind of because people know the names, the legends, who were the
Yeah.
players from that team that stood out to you?
Well, there were a genuine batch of world class players in that group. Ray Clements and Ozzy Ardiles were coming towards the end of their careers, but they were of world class caliber anyway.
Yeah,
You obviously had Glenn Hoddle, and Glenn Hoddle is Glenn Hoddle,
yeah,
and maybe we'll get into a debate like lots of people do when they talk about the greatest player who's ever played for Spurs.
yeah,
But we could possibly talk about that later.
mhm,
Chris Waddle,
yeah,
well, obviously Chris Waddle was sublime during his time at Spurs before he went to Marseille. And again, it was a season when Clive Allen scored 49 goals.
yeah,
And anyone scoring close to 50 goals, unless you're Erling Haaland,
yeah.
is always going to be a special thing. So yeah, there were some sort of key players around that time. Lots of other probably names that you would remember, like a Steve Hodge, a Paul Allen, a Nico Klassen, and then kind of finally a Sir Gary Mabbutt and a Richard Gough.
Well, Mabbutt, very much a hero of mine personally from Bristol. Richard Gough's it's a funny one for me because I never saw him play for Spurs. Like my earliest memory is seeing him play for Glasgow Rangers, and I describe him as just being an absolute rock of a defender. Like you're not going to get past him, sort of scenario. Was he like that? Was it a hell of a partnership seeing him at Spurs?
Yeah, kind of going through this process, I was really lucky that I got to speak to lots of ex professionals,
Yeah,
some of my heroes and stuff like that, and Richard Gough was one of them. Richard Gough was really open and candid,
yeah,
because at the end of the day, he only had one full season at Spurs,
yeah,
and he's looked upon now as again a bit like a god, like a legend for that one particular season.
yeah,
He was I've heard people refer to him as a Rolls Royce of a defender.
yeah.
He would glide around. His reading of the game was superb.
Mm.
His timing was superb. His pace and recovery was fantastic. His heading was unbelievable.
Yeah,
There were parts of his game that which kind of makes him not as awesome as people may think or remember him as. But
yeah,
again, he's human. He's flawed like most other people. But the relationship he created with Gary Mabbutt was pretty sublime. So yeah, he's up there in lots of people's eyes as a club legend, and rightly so, because it was one season of brilliance from him, really.
Yeah, well, I mean, I always find the kind of because it's a debate thing around with the use of legend. People seem to get very uh, tetchy about it, or very kind of protective over it. Like, oh, can't be a legend, didn't win anything, can't be this, can't be this. And I always look at it and say, to me, it's a personal thing, and also it's a kind of you cannot necessarily judge an individual by a team game success in that sense. I mean, we have this debate a lot currently with the current side and a
Yeah.
certain Harry Kane, of course. But if that season clearly left a pretty indelible mark on you, and I dare say a lot of people.
Yeah.
And if he was a key part of that, then yeah, people are going to remember him as like a club legend. But as you just said, really only played one full season, so you kind of wonder, does that fit? But again, it's a very personal thing. It's what people remember and how they remember.
I, I think it's another one of those things is because, especially going into the late 80s and into the 90s, and that large portions of the 90s were brilliant in some ways, but also quite bleak in other ways for Spurs fans.
Very, yeah,
Um, but from a defensive point of view, we could talk about midfielders and attackers who have been absolutely superb
yeah,
in Spurs colours, but we very rarely talk about defenders in the same light.
yeah, true,
Someone like a Gary Mabbott, yeah, that's a given. He's always going to be held up there in such high regard and high esteem.
yeah,
It's similar with Vertonghen and Alderweireld. Possibly
yeah,
the best partnership Spurs have had since the Gotham Mabbott days. But yeah, it was. I suppose his performance. It was a legendary year, which puts him in one of the Spurs' defensive legends. Again, regardless of
yeah.
winning something or not, because Harry Kane's still a legend in our eyes, isn't he? And yet at this point we know he hasn't won anything as yet.
No,
But yeah, you're right. That debate. I think in society nowadays people use the word legend too often and too
yeah.
freely. But yeah, it's use it few and far between, I'd say. Yeah.
With so going back talking about yourself, is I mean a little bit more about you. Are you someone who is this your first book? Is this your 10th? What's your background in this with putting together these types of books?
Yeah, do you know this is actually my first book,
Okay.
and I've never really wanted to be an author. I never really considered to be an author, and do you know what? I had such luck speaking to so many people in the media, people like ex players
Yeah.
and ex coaches and stuff like that, and I think they were happy to talk to me on the strength that I probably wasn't an author or a journalist.
Okay.
Um, so maybe my newness and my in some ways potential naivety to this world held me in good stead. But not the fact that I want to be an author ongoing or anything like
Yeah.
that, but I just wanted to produce a book. I wanted to produce a book about a season in Spurs' history that no one had ever produced before, and regardless of Spurs hadn't won anything at all,
Yeah.
I always felt that this is a season worth documenting. It's worth kind of understanding the chronicles of the ins and outs of that season, because it was quite fascinating, and that's why I decided to do it, really.
Well, my next question to you is why this season? I mean, we've kind of touched on it already in
Yeah,
terms of the personal point for you from you. Also, you mentioned Clive Allen 49 goal. I mean, that on its own is enough for anyone who isn't aware of the season to kind of prick their ears up and be like, well, what? A Tottenham player scored 49 goals?
yeah.
Um, what what for you? Because obviously, as you said, the season ended with no silverware. So where did Tottenham finish in the league? It would have been the old First Division.
Yeah.
What was the result of this season?
It was a season of nearlies.
Yep.
Spurs were knocked out in the League Cup quarter-final. Sorry, League Cup semi-final, second leg replay.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
they finished third in the league behind eventual winners Everton and runners-up Liverpool. And obviously they lost in the FA Cup final to Coventry that year as well,
Yeah.
which is, and again, another part of that, which is why it's a historic season for most football lovers rather than just Spurs fans or Coventry fans or anything like that, because again, so much did happen that year.
Yeah.
But for me, and again, I go into depth and detail within the book. It's the football that was played. It was the
Yeah.
style. It was the formational change. It was a bit revolutionary, and it was something that the generation of 4-4-2 hadn't really seen.
Yeah.
European teams had seen structures like this, but Spurs and their new manager of that year, which was David Pleats, had just kind of put a different spin on utilising the quality that he had within the team. So that's a big catalyst of the change and why they played so well that year.
It's interesting as well that this is the season with David Pleat in charge, because again, a lot of the younger Spurs fans, David Pleat, really the only real memory of him, or the only real, is the director of football role at the club, and also a consistent caretaker. You know, he'd be in and out every time we fired a manager. So for me, again, him being in charge for this season, what was the formation? What was the revolutionary way forward that they played?
Well, it was again, like spending time with Richikoff. I was very lucky to spend time with David.
Yeah,
And again, I was even more lucky that David agreed to do the forward for the book. So he opens my book with his words on that season. Time with David was superb. He's like a football
he
encyclopedia.
is. Yeah,
His memory is unbelievable. But at the time he joined Spurs from Luton,
yeah,
this was just after the Mexican World Cup, and it was also in the height of the sort of like the era of football hooliganism,
yeah,
the European ban on English teams. But the formation that Spurs went with was purely to cope with the quality of midfielders that you had
yeah,
in Paul Allen, Chris Waddle, Tony Galvin, Glenn Hoddle, Ozzy Ardiles,
yeah,
and then obviously they also bought Steve Hodgin that year. So he had so many quality midfielders,
yeah,
and he tweaked the system to a 4-5-1,
yeah,
playing Clive Allen up on his own,
yeah,
which allowed Hoddle to sort of like float in a bit of a Michel Platini role, which
yeah.
English teams had never really done before, and
No.
and and with Hoddle's quality, it was probably the best way to utilise him. But yeah, so that they sort of stumbled across that as the season went on.
Yeah. No, I mean it's interesting, and I think obviously the next key question is for everybody listening: where will they be able to get the book? When is it available?
So it's available online with Waterstones
Okay.
and Amazon. And you can also acquire a copy via the publisher, and they're called Kronos Publishing.
Yeah.
I'm sure, Sam, if you probably be able to put some links and stuff
Yeah. Yeah. By all
onto
means.
your
Yeah.
webpage, and we can kind of get that sorted. But you can apply for pre-sale copies now. It's being released on the 3rd of August.
Okay.
So just before the football season, but again, holiday season. So if there's any Spurs fans that want to take their book on holiday and have a good read about a superb nostalgic year,
Yeah.
hopefully they'll find it enjoyable.
Yeah. Right. I mean, again, I come back to this. Apologies. A fantastic disappointment, because the more I looked at that title, the more I kept thinking to myself, there are probably other seasons that I could give that title to.
Yes. Someone said that to me. They said, "Well, with that title, you can then just start doing different editions.
Well,
What other seasons can come under this banner?" And it's
yeah,
true, really, isn't it?
fantastic disappointment too. I mean, just in recent memory, the Pochettino team, finishing behind Leicester, finishing the
Yeah,
season behind Chelsea. The football we played in those seasons was phenomenal for the vast majority of the
yeah,
seasons, and it was some of the
yeah.
best that I've witnessed, in sort of modern times. So again, yeah,
I,
it could kind of easily fall into that. Um,
do you know, I
Fantastic. It sounds
completely
a lot
agree.
lot better than the word Spursy anyway.
It does, and the thing is, whenever you speak to Spurs fans, looking back at that sort of 2016,
Yeah,
2017 sort of time period, whenever Spurs were playing,
yeah,
you always wanted to go and watch it.
yeah,
You wanted to go and see it. You knew you were going to be entertained. More often than not, we ended up winning. But watching the dynamic of Kane, Ali, Ericsson, Son, it was superb. And again, probably currently and up to date, watching Spurs under Jose and Conte has
Yeah.
been, from a football perspective, horrific.
Well, it's killed it. I mean, it's we've. I mean, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your thoughts on the current situation. I mean, you said about you're a season ticket holder. You go to watch Spurs a lot. Has that continued to this day?
No, so I'm originally from London.
Yeah.
I moved away from London. I moved up north.
Yeah.
Probably just over 20 years ago. So I kind of stopped going to Spurs probably mid-late 90s,
Yeah.
like from a season
Smart.
ticket perspective.
Yeah. At
Yeah,
that particular moment, smart. Yeah.
I think I was getting a bit down. Do you know, come back to that sort of fantastic disappointment in another team.
Yeah.
One of my final seasons as a season ticket holder there was the Klinsmann, Sheringham,
Oh,
Anderson,
yeah.
Barmby, Dumitrescu, Popescu. And then we finish it with
Absolute madness.
yeah, and then you finish it with Colin Calderwood and David Kerslake. But enough said
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
So my time then back to Spurs was very, very few and far between. So
Yeah.
I managed to get to most finals. I managed to get to the '99 final, the 2008 final.
Yeah.
I've seen Spurs win trophies, which is a nice thing.
Yeah.
I was luckily there for the '91 final too.
I did the semi-final. I was there for the semi-final in '91, which I still think was the better game.
Absolutely, and I was lucky to be there. Funnily enough, when I was speaking to some Spurs, like a David Howes and a Vinnie Samways
Yeah.
and a Paul Allen, it was hard because I really wanted to focus on talking about this season, and I
Yeah,
didn't
of
want
course.
to deviate because I speak to them and they're like, you want to talk about Gaza now, don't you? And I'm like, no, I'm talking about 86, 87. But then I got to the end of it. I said, look, I know I'm talking about this, but thank you. Do you know what? Thank you for 1991. Thank you for
Yeah.
that semi-final because that was just
Well, that
absolutely superb.
yeah. I mean, a lot of people, again, younger people listening, in 1991, Arsenal were winning the league, and they did win the league,
Yeah,
and they
they were superb. Yeah,
they were a very good side, very dominant. And we wrecked them in that semi-final. I mean, no, we
yeah,
absolutely smashed them. Gaza's free kicks, the thing everyone always talks about, but we really outplayed them. We outran them. We buried them in the ground. Lineker was superb. That's one of my earliest sort of really cling on to Tottenham memories. Boy, did it go downhill from there for a
it
good
did.
10 years.
Keep on that memory though.
Yeah,
I've got a lovely little story from. So the physio at the time of this book that I've kind of written, John Sheridan was the
yeah,
Spurs physio. Everyone knows him as the limping physio.
yeah.
Lovely guy, fantastic guy. Again, buy his book. It is called The Limping Physio. It's a superb read.
I need to
When,
ask, limping because he genuinely had a limp, or was there some?
yes, yeah,
Okay.
no. He genuinely had like a medical complaint, which again didn't restrict the fact that he had to run on the pitch and tend to Spurs' needs. So he did
Well,
it
this is
diligently.
86, 87. So all he had was a sponge in cold water, surely.
That's it.
Yeah,
Back then, that's probably all you needed. But
yeah,
I think if you speak to him, you find out that there was a lot more to that. But the story that he says, because he was still at Spurs, he was very key to Gazza's rehab
Okay.
after he did his knee in the '91 final
Yeah,
before he went to Lazio.
yeah,
And whilst I was talking to him doing the research for this book, we were on like a Teams call, and
yeah.
he moved his camera around, and on his wall there's a picture of Paul Gascoigne's 1991 semi-final shirt.
Oh wow.
And because of the work that and the rehab that John Sheridan had gone
Yeah.
through with Gascoigne during his career, that's why Gascoigne gave it to him.
Wow,
I mean,
that's a hell of a keepsake.
if there's a shirt from that game, blimey, that's the one to have, isn't it?
In the ever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
legendary game.
So yeah. So like I said, your thoughts on all things current then, because obviously you talk about fantastic disappointment. You talk about the football played, and it's
Yeah,
often a very Spurs thing, the Spurs way, playing good
yeah,
football, playing attacking football. It's been an identity we've had for a long time since Arthur Rowe, really, in the 50s, push and run sort of, and brought everything in. And since then, managers have come in and gone, etc. But the ones that are etched in our memories are the ones that have embraced that and have played a certain way. In the modern times, Harry Redknapp did it, Mauricio Pochettino did it. Aside from them, it's been pretty drab. And recently, from Jose into the one we don't talk about to Conte, the philosophy has been very much,
Yeah.
defence, counterpunch. I actually heard Ange Postecoglou say that the other day. His biggest challenge as the current coach is to get this group to stop counterpunching. So, that's all they've done for 3-4 years.
Yeah.
As a fan and someone due to the community that we have with the Facebook page, Twitter, etc., I watch practically every single Tottenham game. Under Mauricio, it was an absolute joy. Win, lose or draw, I enjoyed watching us play. Obviously we lost, I was tacked off, but there was never a game where I felt like the team didn't try. Now, fast forward through the years, I have to admit, I am very jaded right now, like very mentally done in from watching us for the last few years.
Yeah.
It has been drab. It has been poor. For yourself, like, season ticket holder in the past, you focusing on this book, on that particular season. You've picked out other seasons. How have you felt over the last few years under those managers, and what's your opinion now of the new man that's come in?
Do you know, again, like a David Pleat, a Keith Birkinshaw, a Bill Nicholson,
Yeah,
Harry Redknapp, and a Pochettino. We remember those names because of the football that they played.
yeah,
Um, George Graham and Juan de Ramos, they both won trophies,
yeah.
but we don't necessarily remember them for the football that they played.
No,
Ramos was lucky that he had Berbatov, and Graham was lucky that he
he.
had Ginola.
Yeah, I mean, Juan de Ramos basically won that with Martin Yole's team, which still pisses me
Yes,
off, to be honest with you. Because
absolutely.
if Martin Yole, I loved Martin Yole. He kind of,
Yeah,
for me, was just a wonderful personality. The more stories I hear about him as well, the more I love him. And it was his team, and I'm still so annoyed that it wasn't him, because that Juan de
I
Ramos, it was
I agree.
ridiculous. The,
I,
the,
I, I
the,
mean, I think for where the club are now, I don't
yeah,
think people realise that Martin Jol actually put the foundations in for that because
massively.
of
Yeah,
the bleak 90s into the early noughties.
yeah.
Again, it was superb to see Glenn Hoddle go back to Spurs, but
Didn't
it
work.
was limp. It was quite bland.
Yeah,
So Martin Jol changed the philosophy, the footballing philosophy of this
yeah,
club, I believe, and started to where we are
yeah,
today, really.
yeah.
But yeah,
Good.
currently, I likened the Jose and the Conte appointments to like the superstar DJs.
Yeah,
They're like the Pete Tong, they're the Danny Ramplings, they're the Carl Coxes. They're all the big superstar DJs
yeah,
that we've tried and they haven't worked for us. Okay.
yeah.
Um, I don't necessarily think the superstar elite managers work for us
Mm.
because I'm sure I've heard you and Matt talk on the podcast before, and like lots of other Spurs podcasts talk as well, that Conte probably more than Jose, you felt like they were doing us a favour.
Yeah,
You felt like, well, I'm here to just help you out,
yeah,
like we were the whole club and everything connected to it were beneath them,
yeah,
which was completely wrong. I mean, with what I do as a profession, I work with leadership teams, leaders, creating high performing cultures and high performing teams and stuff like that. And culture figures time and time again
yeah,
because you cannot get a performance culture with such sort of failings at the top. So it's not to go into to Levy because this will just turn into another conversation.
yeah.
But from Postecoglou, you know, I think this guy has a philosophy that is close to where Spurs fans want to see their team play.
I agree, and there's also an element from him. I mean, obviously, he. I don't think he was anyone's first choice. Anyone who says he was their first choice, then okay. But I don't think he was. I don't think many Spurs fans would say he was the guy they picked out of all the available managers. But one of the things is, once it became clear he was, I then started reading. I watched everything I could. I read everything I could because I wanted to try and understand who the guy was who was coming in. And there's a quote very recently, actually. So since he's been appointed, and I think even whilst he's on this tour down in Australia, there was a 60 Minutes Australia thing. And one of the questions that got put to him was about, sort of like philosophy and motivating players. And he kind of said that, you can scream and shout at a person and they'll go and do what you've asked them to do. But they'll never be 100% on that because they're not being motivated. They're being screamed at to do it.
Exactly.
If you create and instill a philosophy that people buy into, that they want to go and do it, that's the way. That's the way forward. And
Yeah.
you just listen to that and you think, oh wow, that's so refreshing. It sounds so obvious, but at the same time, it seems to have been lost on our last few managers. You look at the point you made about Jose is right. I didn't get the impression from Jose that he felt he was doing us a favour. I'm not a
No.
big fan of his, but I don't get that. But at the same time,
No, it's more Conte. Yeah.
when he spoke to the players, I don't know how much of that was for the Amazon documentary or what, but when he spoke to the players, I did get the feeling of, I'm Jose Mourinho. How dare you?
Yeah.
Not bow. When I walk in a room, what are you all doing? Like, I've told you this, and you've not gone and done it. And his almost like frustration at, how dare you not revere me like I'm a god? I think what put a lot of people out, just like, what, you're not all that. I'm not gonna do this for you because I don't believe in you. And when you had that squad of players who just basically were working under Mauricio, had grown up with Mauricio as well, their bond to him meant that it was like a stepdad coming in, Mum and dad got divorced, dad's left, who's this new guy? I'm not going to listen to you, you're not my real dad, And that was kind of the relationship. And then you had the other guy who was just a joke, everyone knew he was like the 15th choice. Everybody knew he wasn't going to last. The whole squad must have just been like, what the hell is this? And it was a farce. And then they bring in Conte, name value. He came in, and the thing about it is you could tell the players tried. Like, you could see that in that end of that first season, they were all trying to buy in. They were all trying to get it and work it. But then we go into season 2 with the training, everything they did. None of them were happy. Like, you can run people into the ground to increase their fitness, but do it in a way that players want to do it. And then you can do it from a drill structure, marine sort of way where people feel like, why are you doing this to me? And you could see it like immediately from game 1 of last season, it was missing. Something just wasn't there. There was no fire, no click, no kind of... On the podcast, I must have said 1,000 times, when we click again, like we did at the end of last season, and it just never happened because they weren't happy. And I think people, possibly from your professional point of view, you can answer this. I personally think that people underestimate that. Footballers earn all this money; they should be happy all the time. People underestimate the impact of actually going to work and enjoying what you're doing and who you work with.
It is. It's the psychology of a professional footballer now is completely different to what it was 10 years ago, what it was 20 years ago and 30 years ago. That's the evolution of life. That's the evolution of, let's face it, the workplace. That's the evolution of elite sport. Like the Alex Ferguson years, the old hairdryer treatment, that wouldn't work anymore. No. It worked at the time, but you will not get the best out of your players now. No. I think Conte's biggest issue was, again, bear in mind, players want to be loved, players want to be respected, they want to be revered, they want to be treated fairly and reasonably and stuff like that. But to hear your manager constantly slate you and the club in the press time and time again, which just it's like slow psychologically beating them down. And it's not going to get the best out of the individuals. The art of coaching, leading, managing and influencing is about relationship and rapport. If you don't have relationship and rapport with your people, whether you're managing a team in the world of insurance, whether you're running a team of volunteers in the world of charity.
Yeah.
Managing and leading people is getting the best out of people, and you do that by understanding them.
Yeah.
There could be players that you could shout at them and it could get the best out of them, but there could be lots of other players that tax doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
So the man management side of things, I just don't think it was necessarily their bag. You look at someone like Pochettino and Postecoglou, you kind of look at it and think that's part of their makeup.
Yeah.
I think psychologically they understand that they don't want to be everyone's best friend, but they want to have a relationship. They want to have a rapport with them.
Yeah.
And to be honest, you even saw that with Martin Jol and even
Big
elements
time,
of Harry Redknapp. Harry Redknapp, no offense, he was never the greatest tactician.
Nope.
He was never the greatest footballing mind, but he was like a motivator supreme.
He was.
You would go into battle having had a chat with Harry, who's made you feel like you're the best player in the world.
Yeah, made you feel 10 feet tall. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But you've got players like Harry Kane and Son who raise their game time and time again because they are genuine world-class footballers.
Yeah.
But they're doing that out of their own excellence, their own motivation. But there are some players in that squad that aren't as good as some of those real European or world-class players that we do have. And for them, you're not going to get the best out of them. I mean, effective managers can sometimes see players play above their station just through managing, coaching, and leading by that influence.
Well, you've only got to look at for me, the Pochettino effect. You only got to look at the impact he had on certain players for us, but also prior to us at Southampton. You've only got to look at the players that then left Southampton who weren't coached by him anymore. Big money transfers and just faded away. It's because they weren't getting that level of coaching, that level of tactical awareness. They weren't working in the same system. My best example is Schneiderlin. That guy was regarded as the greatest thing to defensive football since Claude Makélélé.
He was.
And then just vanished. Was just unbelievably poor every game afterwards.
I mean, take Danny Rose, for example. He's just popped into my head. Of that group, do you know, pre-Pochettino, Danny Rose hardly got into the Spurs team.
Yep.
Do you know, Danny Rose was not a player that Spurs fans would think, do you know, I want Danny Rose in the side.
Well, I remember him signing a new... He
scored a corker against Arsenal.
Yeah, I remember him signing a new 5-year deal after Pochettino arrived, and then he had to delete his social media because of the way Spurs fans reacted to it.
Yeah.
It was disgusting.
But then you had 2 or 3 years where you had him on one side and Walker on the other with Toby and Yan in the middle, where as a defensive unit, that's probably the most brilliant defensive unit I've ever seen Tottenham have.
Yeah,
that back four was superb. But Danny Rose, for like that year or two, maybe 2.5 years, he was one of the world's best left backs.
He was, without a doubt. Yeah, he was.
But before that, he was kind of average, and then after that period, he was kind of average again.
Yeah.
That's because I think Pete Pochettino knew how to get the best out of him.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I'd absolutely agree with that. And that's one of the things that kind of encourages me with Postecoglou is that you see him and the way he coaches and the way he drives his teams and the way he wants them to play. My hope is that he has that ability as well, because there's a lot of players in the squad that Tottenham fans have completely written off. Some of them I can completely understand. Like, you've had chance after chance after chance under different managers.
Yeah.
But there are some in there, the only managers they've had have been Jose, the other one, Conte. You can't, for me, I can't judge them yet. Like I said to Dan, who's one of our admins, for me, this squad, whoever he keeps there, I'm not going to judge them until Christmas. It's like clean slate for me, because they are finally going to have someone who wants to coach them to go forward, attack, not counterpunch. So let's judge them on that once he's had time to get in there, coach them, and then also he'll be able to make judgments. So yeah, I mean, I'm excited by what's to come, purely because I genuinely feel I'm going to enjoy watching us again. And like I said, when you watch as many games as I do, being able to enjoy it is a big thing. Like, it really helps.
The thing is, though, Sam, from if you're a fan of any team, any club, do you know, sometimes over the years, my kids have said to me, "Oh, do you know what? Why don't you go and support another club?" And I'm like, "No, it doesn't work like that.
It does not.
You cannot. It's not as easy as that."
No.
So yeah, we're kind of stuck with it. But to be honest, it's not delusional. But if you don't go into the season with optimism every single time,
Yeah, what you
then
do?
you're setting yourself up to fail.
Yeah.
Look at the optimism at the start of last season.
Yeah.
Do you know, this time last year, Spurs fans in the club were absolutely buoyant.
Yeah.
Do you know,
Yeah,
with some of those signings from last year, knocking Arsenal out of the Champions League position, getting in there, you felt that this Conte era was gradually going somewhere.
Yep.
Roll on 20, 30 weeks after that, it's a car crash.
Yeah.
You know, it's so things do in football do change very quickly. But again, a year ago we were so optimistic. But that's like before the first game of any season, that the level of optimism for most supporters at most clubs is always sky high, isn't it? Because
Of course.
you're always thinking what could be, and that's probably the best time of the year, isn't it?
It is. It is. Yeah. It's the Tottenham life cycle. You know, you finish in May, despondent. June, you hate the club. July, you start to fall in love again. In August, you believe you're going to win it all. That's the life cycle. Rinse and repeat.
It is.
But Stephen, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us today. I will get from you all of the links, and I will put them in the podcast description and on the post when I post the show out for everybody. For everybody listening, if you're interested in the 86-87 season, maybe you remember it. Maybe you're too young, but you'd like to learn about it. I had a very brief look through the information, and it looks great. I'm going to be getting it, so there you go. That's the biggest indictment I can give it. That's the biggest thing. The stamp, Sam's stamp on it. I'm going to be getting it.
Do you know what? Apart from the obvious importance of the Sam stamp, which is I'm obviously glad to have. Do you know the other thing we talk about is the book's a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
Do you know it isn't just all about just Tottenham football. I do put a lot of other content in there as well, so people understand
what was going on.
What was going on, because some of it is either connected or it's relative to the world of football, because the football evolution that we see nowadays, it's sort of kind of started back then. And in actual fact, Spurs were quite pioneering from that perspective. So Irving Scholar, the former chairman, that the commercial world of football that we live in now, he was one of the pioneers of where we are today. Okay. So you could either love it or you could loathe it, but it's quite interesting that we've made a few links to that as well.
Excellent. No, I'm really looking forward to it. So I want to say a massive thank you to everybody for listening, as always. Massive thank you to you, Stephen, for coming on and talking about it, and hope you keep listening, even though you've plugged your book now. I hope you stay as a listener.
Always do, Sam. Always do.
Thank you. Very kind. But yeah, for everybody for tuning in, downloading, thank you very much. Once the season's back in rolling, we'll be back with our usual weekly show. Obviously, like I said, this is the start of our kind of monthly one-off shows as well. We will promote that a little bit more via the Facebook page and all the other social medias. But Stephen, again, if you just want a sort of summary, if you were to give people just sort of like a one or two lines, go and get this book, what would you say?
If you're a Spurs fan or not, you will love this book because it talks about revolutionary football, changes in the football world. It highlights on some world-class footballers, and very rarely would anyone get to see Diego Maradona play for Spurs, but I've covered that too.
Brilliant.
There are quite a lot of links of Maradona too.
Excellent. So thank you so much. Thank you everybody for listening. We'll be back really soon. You all take care.
Thank you for listening to the Spurs News Podcast. We hope that you enjoyed the show. Stay up to date with all things Tottenham. Follow us on social media. All links are in the podcast description.